I got a shiny new Xmaxx and I pulled out the stock speed control and I dropped in a Max 6. Set button is being held down, power on, it'll start to beep. You let go of the button and tap to set neutral, pull the trigger, tap to set full throttle, push reverse, tap to set full reverse, and that's all there is to it. After that, you can get basic operation. Setup involves installation, then you calibrate it to your radio, you check everything out with a basic test run, and then you plug in the programmer and make any setting changes that you need to make. We're gonna go through all of that. A lot of times people will put in a new system, they fire it up and they drive it around and it works okay, but it doesn't work as good as it could because they skipped the calibration process. Step number one, you put your new setup together in your new vehicle. Step number two is to then calibrate it before you do anything else. And calibration is the process where the speed control learns the neutral, the throttle, and the reverse output from your radio system. So if you ever changed any of the settings on the radio, if you put a new radio in there, if you put a new speed control in, you have to do basic calibration. It's kind of a standard thing with, I'd say 95% of the speed controls that are out there. Some speed controls actually don't have a calibration process. They use some generic outputs. But this is a shiny new Traxxas Xmaxx. I have a standard Traxxas TQI radio in there. The throttle switch is set to 50-50, and calibration process is pretty straightforward. We're gonna do that next. It's always a good idea to start this process with fully charged batteries. I've done it with batteries that are storage charge as well, so it works kind of both ways. But I'll explain the process first. You're gonna hold down the set button, turn the speed control on, and then you're gonna tap the button and move the throttle as you go through the process. You set the neutral, you set the throttle, and you set the full reverse. So this calibration process, while it's on a Max 6 right now, it works on any of the Max series. Any of the speed controls that have a calibration in the Hobbywing lineup pretty much work this same way. If you have a speed control that only has one button instead of two, you're going to press and hold that same one button to start the process. For any of the two-button speed controls, though, you're going to hold the set button, tap the power button to turn it on. Pretty straightforward. Oh. That is a lot to get to calibration, so let's finally get to the calibration. I'm going to hold down the set button, and that's the button that I'll be tapping through this process, and I'm just going to turn it on once here, and you can see throttle positions and that fun stuff here. Set button is being held down, power on, it'll start to beep. You let go of the button and tap to set neutral, pull the trigger, tap to set full throttle, push reverse, tap to set full reverse, and that's all there is to it. After that, you can get basic operation. Installation tip, after you do the setup and calibration, you're gonna wanna check the rotation of the motor. If you give it the throttle and the wheels go backwards, don't change the radio. You're either gonna change the speed control setting, there's a motor rotation setting, or you can swap the outside two wires on a sensorless setup. Censored, that doesn't work. But when I do a sensorless wiring setup for my motor, I try to keep the center wire from the motor to the center wire to the speed control, and I can use these outside two wires to control the direction of the motor if I don't want to get in and use the speed control settings. The other pro tip that I'd have for you, if you're doing an Xmaxx, it's a great truck just the way that it is. Most of the time, just dropping in a Max 6 is more than enough. If you do a motor upgrade, Traxxas' Xmaxx doesn't have standard motor mounting, so you have to find yourself a third-party motor mount. There's a couple options out there. You're gonna have to change some gearing around. Even the smallest motor that we offer in the EZRun lineup that comes with the Max 6 won't drop into this vehicle and mount right up. So I like to use the stock motor. It's not great, but it's not terrible. For most of the stuff that I do with my Xmaxx, I'm not pushing the limits. This thing is a big, huge beast and tons of fun to drive, even at a medium pace. But the big thing, if you're dropping a Max 6 in, the stock speed control goes in with screws, and screw mounting is kind of bad. Hard mounting speed controls or electronics in general is something that I do not like to do. So I use like 2 or 3 layers of that M3M double-sided tape or any sort of nice sticky mounting tape that your hobby shop might carry. Use 2 or 3 layers, and I use one single strip down the center of the speed control. I don't do the whole base, so that it wiggles around a little bit. And what that does is it adds some shock damage. When you crash one of these things, it's all bad. And your electronics are going to take a brunt of that damage. So a little bit of wiggle room goes a long way to keeping the speed control alive. The other one that we get all the time is gearing. What gearing should I run? I've run pretty much stock gearing on the RTRs when I just do a speed control upgrade. If you change out to much larger or heavier tires, you're going to want to drop down a couple pinion gear teeth from stock. Bigger tires, faster motors, always want smaller pinion gears is your general rule of thumb. I've been seeing a lot of stuff where the people do the full custom Xmaxxes and they gear this part like 1-to-1. The spur gear and the pinion gear is the same size. My jury is still out on that. I've heard that it works good, but I've also had some people report some issues. So I'm not sure myself on that, but you can check the super sweet Xmaxx users groups and talk to some of the people who have a lot more experience with that than I do. All right, so the Max series will work with pretty much any of the programmers that we offer. The LED card, the LCD programming box, or the multifunction LCD programming box if you say its whole name. It'll work with the older discontinued Wi-Fi Express, and it'll also work with the OTA. So none of the devices enhance the speed control or add any settings to it. It's just a different way to adjust the settings that are inside. So it doesn't add data logging, it doesn't add live data output, it doesn't add any features by using a different programming devices. All the programming devices just change the settings inside the speed control. If you don't have the LED program card for the Max series, but you have it for, say, the QuicRun series or a brush speed control, it's the same box. The only difference between them is really the sticker that's on it. So just ignore the sticker and use the instruction manual for the speed control, and you'll be able to use any of the LED boxes on the Max series. So it's pretty nice. You can find the app for the OTA or the Wi-Fi Express in your app store for your smartphone or your tablet. It is listed under HW-Link V2. Let's talk about the programming device a little bit here. If the programmers on the Max series plug into the fan port, almost the entire Hobbywing lineup, there's either a programming port on the top of the speed control, or if the fan port has the JST style plug and 3 pins in it, it's going to plug into that port. If it does not have a 3-pin connector on the top of it, or it does not have a 3-pin fan port, you're going to use the receiver wire that goes into the receiver. But most of them use the actual dedicated programming port on top of the speed control, or they share the fan port if it's got 3 pins in it. This programming box is the basic LED box, and very easy to use. It just plugs in, it lights up. You never really have no muss, no fuss. You can cycle through your items very rapidly. You can change the values of them very rapidly, and if you don't want to make changes, you can set everything back to defaults very easily. So there's an item button that cycles through the selections. There's a value button that turns it up or down. There's a reset to reset it, and then once you make your changes, you have to hit OK to save it. And maybe just to make things a little easier on all of us, you can also check with the LCD programming box. So we're going to use that because it's a little easier to read. But the settings that show up in the LCD box will match up with what's available on the sticker. Some of these aren't going to match because this covers speed controls that have more settings and less settings. So you may run into a situation where the running mode, for example, only has 2 options instead of 3. Well, 1 and 2 match, and since 3 is not there, it doesn't exist. That's the easy way to remember that one, if that makes any sense. Well, on this end, it says ESC. That's where this plugs into. There's a S, a plus, and a minus. The S is for signal. That's the white one. You turn the speed control on. You get a little flash screen, and you tap Enter to get it to connect to everything. And once it connects, it'll tell you the fun stuff and get you in there. So running mode is your first item that's available, and you have forward, reverse, brake, or setting number 1 is forward and brake. So you can turn off the reverse if you were to run this in a racing condition or you didn't want to use your reverse. I like to have reverse, obviously. LiPo cells, auto calculate is where it looks at the battery voltage and sets accordingly. That's okay if you're for sure always going to run charged batteries. If you're going to be using, you're not real good about your batteries, auto can be a little risky because if you put in, let's say, a dead set of 4 cells, it'll read that set of 6 cell and you can do some damage. So make sure that you stay on top of that stuff, or you can set that to the correct value. I am going to run this truck on 8S all of the time, so that's what it's going to be set to permanently. That way, in case I put a dead pack in there, it will hopefully not ruin it. Next one is the cutoff voltage. This is the how much discharge you're going to get out of the battery. It doesn't have a value because different batteries, especially in a lot of the basher rigs and the type of plugs that you're going to use, the number that you put in for your voltage cutoff isn't always going to match what the charger shows for a number of reasons. The load, the way the C rating responds, the plugs that you use, a bunch of really nerdy science facts. But in the end, the voltage that you have on your screen won't match what it is when you put it on your charger, and it makes people have some cause for concern. So it's changed from medium, high to off and low. So low is the most runtime. That's going to be around probably I'd say as low as 3.2 to 3.4 per cell. Medium is more along the lines of 3.5 to maybe 3.7 per cell. And then high is going to be probably above 3.7 per cell for the voltage cutoff. And what that is doing is safety. The higher the voltage, the safer the battery, the less runtime you're going to get. But for what I'm doing with this, I'm going to leave it on its default of medium because that's pretty safe most of the time. Next up, item number 4 is our thermal protection. I leave this on default because that's the lowest setting. Again, these are internal temperatures. It's not going to be the external temperature that you're going to see. They're going to be much cooler on the outside than this, probably half, or give or take. Motor rotation, this is what we were talking about before. If you don't want to switch the order of the wires, definitely don't use your radio to change the rotation of your motor for forward. Use this setting. If you need to make your motor go backwards as forwards, this is where you would do that. Item number 7 is your BEC voltage. That is the power to your receiver and your servos. So if all of your servos are for high voltage, you can run them at the higher setting. If all of your servos are high voltage but one is low voltage, you're not going to do any damage to the high voltage servos by running them on lower voltage. They'll just run a little slower and have a little less power. Not a huge thing. Sometimes they run a little cooler, so that can be good. I pretty much always run all my stuff at 6 volts for the BEC just to keep it alive a little longer. And then your max brake force. This is adjustable so that you can have more or less brake. A lot of times 100% brake is way too much for these big trucks. So 50% is usually pretty good. I run a little more than that. I'm going to turn it up to 65%. Hit OK to save. Max reverse, much the same. Sometimes full reverse is too much. And for what a lot of these vehicles have in them, we don't even want you to have all of the reverse. So you can only really go all the way up to 50%. And it's for your own good. I get it. You want full reverse so for max wheelies, but it's real bad for the speed control. You don't want that. And then item number 10 is your punch. This is how linear your throttle is. High C batteries, good battery plugs, you can run the punch turned all the way up. If you have any weird shutdowns or blinking lights before the battery's dead, basically turn your punch down or keep it at number 3 for the default. It's pretty safe. It still has plenty of rip. If you have the good plugs, the good battery packs, good solder joints, you could certainly turn the punch level. And on these, it goes all the way up to 5. It's not a super fine adjustment, but 5 is going to be the highest and basically linear throttle with no delays or holdback, if you will. You hit OK to save. And then our final one is our drag brake. That's a spelling typo, but don't worry about that. Drag brake, I always, on my monster trucks, I leave it 0, but what drag brake is, it's not brakes for drag racing. It's brakes that come on automatically at neutral. So for some of the track applications, folks want to have some drag brake where when they let off the throttle, the brakes come on. For monster truck, definitely don't want that. So I leave that at 0%. Hit item. You can restore everything to the default. If you didn't like any of that, or you go out and run it, you don't like it, you want to put it back to stock, you can use that and restore factory defaults. But once you're done, you just turn off the speed control, and since we saved after every setting, we're good to go. Unplug this guy. If you are curious on orientation, the black wire on the programming cards goes towards the middle motor wire that's there. The white wire goes towards the outside of the speed controller, towards that outer edge wire. So the white programming wire would go by your C terminal. The black one would go towards the B terminal that's in the middle and with the fan port. But basically, the black wire from the fan and the black wire from the programming wire line up the same when you plug that in. When you're going to plug your fan back in, the black wire goes in the same side as that center motor. Always turn your radio on before you turn the car on. Always turn the radio off after you turn the car off. Never store your vehicle with the battery packs plugged in. You always want to unplug it when it's not actively being driven. There you have it, nerd friends. Thanks for tuning in and joining us all the way till the end. Don't forget to check out the podcast so you can win some free RC stuff. We give away Hobbywing combos every single episode. The podcast is called RC Stuff. You can find it on your favorite podcast service or look it up at anchor.fm/Hobbywing. Thanks again for tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, shoot us an email, northamerica@hobbywing.com. You can use one hand, 2 fingers, or whatever the case may be.